Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Managers Connect virtual talks for Thursday, May 21st. My name is Marilyn Cavaretta-Lutzel, et je suis la régionale gestionnaire pour Saint-Angers, Ontario. Welcome, everyone. Bienvenue. I'm thrilled to present today's session. Please note, s'il vous plaît, notez que notre événement aujourd'hui est enregistré. Please note that at the end of our session, you will receive a YouTube video link that'll provide our recorded session. I have the pleasure today to moderate our virtual talk, one of the several ways that the NMC is working to engage over 40,000 managers and aspiring leaders across the country. This year marks our anniversary. We're proud to celebrate 20 years in the NMC and look forward to delivering impactful events throughout the year. For today's session, we will be discussing courageous conversations, des conversations courageuses, in the context of performance management. We have a special guest, Gina Scaramuzzi from the Canadian Grain Commission, and my colleague, Lisbeth Savard, who will be hosting the session. I know we are all looking forward to an engaging session. So without further delay, I will pass the baton over to Lisbeth Savard. Elizabeth, à toi.
Merci. So hello to everyone who's joining us this morning. Un grand bonjour à tout le monde. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the NMC Managers Connect virtual talks focusing on courageous conversations and performance management. Donc, je voudrais vous présenter notre invitée, Madame Gina Scaramuzzi, Senior Human Resources Advisor at the Canadian Grain Commission. Bienvenue à cette conversation virtuelle de la communauté nationale des gestionnaires intitulée Les gestionnaires Connect, qui portera sur les conversations courageuses dans le contexte de la gestion du rendement. So this is a bilingual session et nous vous invitons à vous sentir libre de poser les questions dans la langue officielle de votre choix. So Gina?
Hi, good afternoon.
Yes, hi. So before we get into the formal questions, I'd like to ask you about your transition into this new role of yours. So I understand that you started only 2 short weeks before we were all sent home to work. So I imagine that transition must have been quite the thing to go through. So, you know, myself being a little bit newer in my role, I imagine that it must have been quite a challenge for you.
For sure. So I just want to make sure everyone can hear me okay and good. All right, I see some heads nodding. So absolutely, I started my new position on March 2nd, and on March 16th was sent home. And I would say the transition was pretty positive, and I would attribute that to 2 factors. The first one is being onboarded in a really good way. And so this is something that falls to managers. And so I think it's important to take note of that today. So I showed up on my first day. I had access to all my tools. I was introduced to the team. Senior management invited me to their meeting so that I could introduce myself to them. I had my manager made meetings, had scheduled meetings with all of the colleagues I would be working with on the various portfolios. I even had my core learning profile. So what mandatory training did I have to complete at the CGC? Because we know once things get busy, sometimes the learning and the training falls to the side. So it was the best onboarding experience I've had in the public service. I worked for a few departments. And it really is because I had a manager who took the time to really ensure that was a positive experience. So that really helped because I was only in the office for 2 weeks. The other factor that made it is at work at NMC, hugely valuable and important. I stepped into a new organization and I already had a few colleagues that I had worked with or met at various events. So whether it was through the NMC, through the Federal Youth Network, through IPAC, or even working on events like GCWCC, I already have some friends at the department. And while I've been at home, like many of you, I've been able to reach out to them to informally ask them about the culture of the organization, the history, who's who. And so having a strong network, I can't say how valuable it has been throughout my career, but also in this sort of transition to a new role amongst a global pandemic.
What a story. I'm sure that this will be one of the things that you'll remember about your career is that time you started that new job and 2 weeks later. Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, I just wanted to tell everyone, just remind everyone very quickly, if you can make sure that you're on mute and off video, that'll help us to kind of manage the quality of this call, so of this video chat. Donc, un petit rappel d'éteindre votre vidéo et puis votre microphone au cas où vous avez oublié. Alors, merci. Okay, so let's get it right into it. So our conversation today is around having those uncomfortable conversations with an employee. So I think that's probably one of the hardest things about being a manager is having that uncomfortable conversation, and especially when it comes to performance. So what are some strategies that you would recommend that managers use to better prepare for these discussions?
Yeah, so there's two things that I would sort of mention. The first is sort of the logistics of it all, right? So first thing is commit. Don't wait until you feel like it, because you might not feel like having that uncomfortable conversation. So don't necessarily wait for the mid-year or the end of the year for the performance management cycle to have those conversations. We know that time delays can cause irritation, can increase the chances of employees becoming defensive, right? So aussitôt que possible, ne laissez pas passer beaucoup de temps. Les employés se sentiront frustrés si vous discutez d'un événement qui s'est produit il y a 9 mois. Right? Ils deviendront défensifs car ils sentiront qu'ils ont été jugés pendant 9 mois et n'ont pas eu l'occasion de corriger. So you want to make sure you take advantage and schedule it. And you want to give your employees a heads up. So you don't want to catch them by surprise. So when you want to schedule that appointment, right now, it's a bit of a different context. So you want to think when it's for the employee as well to have the conversation. When we're in the offices, we talk about having a neutral space, right, to have those difficult conversations. When we do it virtually, you want to think of the timing. So many employees right now may be at home. They may be having young children. They may have partners who work outside of the home. So ask yourself, what are you prepared to do and what's your situation so that you can really dedicate yourself and your attention to have that conversation. Find a space. Maybe you're sharing your space with your kids or your partner.
Right.
So when are you going to be able to have that dedicated time and space for that conversation? And when will your employee be able to do that? It might be after hours or on a weekend when they have somebody home that can take on sort of, keeping the kids and the pets and everybody away for 3 minutes. So, think about that for yourself. And of course, try to use video conference if possible. Audio is more important. You don't want to have a conversation if it keeps cutting out and no one can hear anything. But if possible, utiliser la videoconférence, like it's better. And lastly, make sure from a logistics perspective, you schedule a follow-up. You don't want the employee to feel trapped, like this conversation is gonna have to go on and on and on, and that they would have an opportunity to come back. And as a manager, you want to check in to make sure the relationship is okay, right? Because we invest a lot of time in building that with our employees. So you don't want to damage that. So that's kind of the logistics part. The other part is really self-reflection, right? As managers, we need to be honest with ourselves. What's going on in our heads, right? What story are we telling ourselves about what's happening? Because remember, the story we tell ourselves is going to shape what we see, right? How am I feeling about this? Am I still being triggered? If my emotions are not regulated, I may escalate this conversation and then have to apologize and then try and pivot back to the issue. So make sure that you're ready for the conversation from an emotional perspective, you know, breathing exercises, whatever that is that you need to do. So those are the two kind of tips I would have in terms of getting prepared for that conversation.
Yeah, I think it makes a whole lot of sense, right? I mean, when you see it, you should say it, because the idea is having those continuous conversations. And I really like how you highlighted that, you know, we should have a follow-up meeting, because yeah, we want to make sure that we continue having those conversations. So no, that's really helpful. Thank you. Okay, so you know, as we know, well, I think, you know, a lot of us on this call are in this situation. So some managers are working from home and managing their teams virtually for the first time, which is a huge challenge. So with the imminent PMA season, the need to have these difficult or courageous conversations via video or teleconference is an added stress. And you've talked about the importance of, you know, making sure that we connect through video or through audio where it's not cutting out. But what are some tips that you would have to make these conversations more effective? Maybe particularly thinking about someone who's kind of doing this for the first time virtually, right? It's certainly a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, courageous conversations are really rooted in three principles. The first principle is authenticity. So you need to do it from the heart. And again, you need to ask yourself, am I looking for the authentic truth rather than sticking to my own truth, right? So what is, you know, my focus needs to be on what is true, not on being right. Employees, colleagues, family members, they can tell when, you know, your focus is on being right, and they will feel attacked. So you really want that focus to be on harvesting, you know, that connection, building that relationship. And when being authentic is really being vulnerable, right? So it's taking off your armor. It's really being ready, you know, to perhaps experience some uncomfort, to, you know, hear some things that maybe you are difficult to hear, but you need to be vulnerable in order to be present. If you're too protected, then even over video conference or over the phone, your employee will sense that, right? So when you are being your most sincere self, your courageous self, that will help overcome those threats that the employee may feel, and it'll really increase your openness to them, right? And in turn, their openness to you. So that's the first principle. The second one is really around intimacy and empathy. We need to trust that everyone is trying their best, right? So these are unique circumstances. I hear that term, you know, unprecedented times being used.
Yes.
But, you know, we've hired these employees. We know the work that they do. You know, we have to trust that employees are really trying their best. And if things are not going that well, you know, listen, really create that environment where people feel comfortable sharing, and then give them an opportunity to share. So by listening, we'll find out information that we need to know. We'll see our employees as individuals, and you'll develop solutions that they are more willing to adopt and accept, and they will be more willing to listen. So you really want to try and have that intimate conversation with your employees. And then the third principle around courageous conversations is that of responsibility. As managers, you need to accept that this is part of your job, right? So get centered, bring your wisdom, your knowledge to do this right, and give it your all. Approach it with confidence. Don't doubt it. Don't dread it, right? Really challenge directly and care personally is often a phrase that we hear. Because as managers, it's our role to try and remove those barriers that are preventing employees from bringing their best to their job, right? So being courageous is about having that ability to communicate clearly and specifically, while at the same time being sensitive to the needs of others and their responses. So I think if you keep those 3 principles in mind when you're having these conversations, that should help produce some positive results with your employee.
Yeah, all very, very good points, which brings me to my next question. So particularly now, we've kind of talked about all of the pressures that we're under in terms of, you talked about homeschooling kids and all of, even the pets coming to interrupt us. But particularly now, there can be many reasons for an employee not to be fully engaged in their team and to appear to be checked out. So as a manager, what are some approaches that we can take to help an employee re-engage and be a little bit more fully present or not as checked out, I guess?
Yeah. So I definitely think, it has to be an individual approach because every employee is dealing with different challenges. But I have heard from employees who are feeling that their work does not have the same sense of importance because they were not deemed essential and they were sent home. And so some employees are really struggling with that and feeling that, perhaps, their role is no longer relevant or important within the organization. So I think it's important for managers to kind of have that conversation with their employees about their work and how their work is changing because of the situation we're in. The other thing that, employees have shared has been that, they don't feel that their managers, they see their managers so busy that they don't want to interrupt to offer their assistance. Because yes, there are a lot of employees at home juggling, wearing lots of different hats of teacher and caregiver and employee, but there are some employees who are looking for opportunities. Out of crisis comes innovation sometimes and opportunities, but they haven't yet found the right moment to engage with their manager. They don't feel that their manager may be accessible as they're trying to manage in this environment. So at a minimum, I would say managers need to have 1 meeting per week. Again, start with audio to make sure that works. Have some video calls. Let your team know if it's going to be video so they can, get out of their pajamas and maybe brush their hair. So you definitely want to have those touch points. You also want to try and keep the same culture that you had in the office. And so if you often had coffee with your staff, well, have virtual coffee chats where you don't talk about work. I know that there are lots of managers in different departments that would celebrate all of the holidays. Canada's Day is coming up. Maybe it's decorating your virtual workspace and you can share that with your colleagues. Maybe it's showing off your pets. So really try and incorporate some of those same activities that were happening in the workplace and do it in a virtual way. And I think the last thing I'll sort of say is, you want to make every interaction as human as possible, right? So yeah. Greetings, warmth. This is not just because we're using technology. We are still a bunch of people, and the public service is made of humans. And so the more that we can keep that is important. And I know I said that was the last thing, but I just have one more thing I can mention that I heard that I thought was really interesting is, if your employees if they seem less engaged than they were when you were in the office together, it definitely warrants that conversation. I've also heard from employees that they are concerned about their career opportunities and their career mobility and being unseen because they're not in a workplace. They feel invincible. Maybe their work is not deemed essential. Maybe they don't have the right tools to do the work. So they might be feeling that they're getting a little stuck in their careers. And I think as managers, we need to kind of have a good pulse on that and also look for opportunities. Is there an opportunity for them to go on an assignment to another department that's very busy with COVID-19? Is this a time that maybe they can, take in some learning? There's lots of opportunities out there. So, there's lots of different reasons why employees are disengaged. In this environment, there's some additional reasons why. And I think, having those human-to-human kind of conversations and opening yourself up to some other possibilities will help hopefully bring your team back.
Yeah, well, some of the best advice that I've heard so far is that each department gets their turn to be kind of in that crisis situation, right? So for now it's Health Canada, but another time it might be another department. So we never know, right? So it's really important to keep that in mind for sure. OK, donc j'arrive à ma dernière question. Et donc la dernière question porte sur les outils et les stratégies. Alors, où est-ce que les gestionnaires peuvent trouver d'autres outils et stratégies afin de faciliter leur discussion sur le rendement et les conversations courageuses?
Yeah. Maintenant, il existe de nombreuses ressources disponibles, comme l'École de la fonction publique du Canada dispose d'une trousse d'outils pour aider à gérer les équipes virtuelles. L'Académie numérique Digital Academy également des courts articles à 3-4 minutes sur un certain nombre de sujets pertinents. Le réseau des jeunes fonctionnaires organise 3 événements hebdomadaires sur des sujets pertinents, de la utilisation de la technologie à la santé mentale. Mais et vous, en tant que communauté des gestionnaires, partagez vos expériences. C'est vraiment la meilleure façon d'apprendre. Aussi, il y a un site web, lifehack.org, c'est seulement disponible en anglais, mais ce site web a des trucs pour comment avoir des conversations courageuses.
OK, super, merci beaucoup. So thank you for sharing such valuable information and all of these great tips to help managers feel more comfortable having these tough conversations. And I for myself took a lot of notes, and I think there's a lot of valuable information in what you shared today. So at this time, I'd like to ask Marilyn if there are any questions from participants in the chat function. Donc, s'il vous plaît, posez vos questions dans la langue officielle de votre choix. Please feel free to ask your question in the official language of your choice, and I'll just turn it over to Marilyn.
Thank you. Thank you, Gina and Elizabeth, for the wonderful conversation and getting us started in some questions. As we're waiting for some questions to come in, one that did come up is, I think the courageous conversations are probably come to a forefront when we're looking at individuals or employees who have you need to improve, or there's a learning plan that needs to be put in place because they're just not meeting expectations. So do you have some tips that would not only support the manager and how to have that conversation, but how to keep the employee engaged so that they continue to feel valued even if they're not meeting the expectation at that time? So the potential is there, we will get there, but how do we keep them engaged in continuing to improve their performance?
Yeah, so I think this really is about the relationship and the authenticity, right? So, as a manager, it's almost like, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but I'm not sorry that I'm doing this, because that's my role as a manager, right? That's the responsibility piece. But the employee will know if you are really being authentic when you say that this is because I do see the potential. I do feel that we can get you to where you need to go from a performance. And these are the areas that you're lacking. Often I'm called an optimist, but I truly believe, if we think back to how we entered the public service, it's pretty competitive, right? The staffing processes are pretty grueling. We hire employees based on their abilities. And often, if they're not performing in their role and we need to get them to that level of performance, employees want to get there, right? They want to do a good job. I mean, they spent hours applying and spending 6 to 8 months trying to get into the public service. So obviously they are motivated to be public servants. And so being authentic, really focusing on that relationship. This is something you and your employer are going to have to do together to get your employee to be able to perform their duties. Your desire to get them there, make sure that that is your right. So self-reflect on that and be honest with yourself if that's your goal. Because if your goal is to performance manage them out of the public service, they will see that as well, right? So if you want to keep your employee engaged, that's what I'd say. Be authentic, build that relationship, and don't apologize for your responsibility. That's what makes you a good manager, is helping your employees be successful.
Those are great points. Thank you. Anything else in the chat, Marilyn?
Yes, thank you, Gina, for answering that. I think what you're saying has a lot of weight, because as a manager, you need to ensure your boundaries are kept in check, so that this is your role, but you can do it in a way that is engaging. And authenticity has always gone probably the furthest in establishing relationships. So another question that's come in is, sometimes it's difficult to have the conversation face to face. Given our current reality, now it's being done virtually. What are some tips to doing that in a virtual space?
So I think back to kind of when I talked about the logistics of it. And so, if you're having the conversation virtually, you need to ensure that the employee is aware that this is the conversation they're going to have, so that they can prepare themselves in their space and find, a closed room or some quiet space to have that conversation. And you need to do the same thing. And of course, the benefit of, I shouldn't say the benefit, but there is an advantage, because your employees, you've worked with them, you've built a relationship with them. So when you engage with them virtually, you already have sort of a bit of that relationship established. And so I think that you can absolutely achieve that same outcome, even though you are using a different tool. So, there is a screen and that might be different, but you can absolutely get a sense of an employee's emotional state, frustration, seeing them, the body language will come through the video, the camera, just as much as it does when they're sitting across the room. On the phone is more challenging, right? So I think on the phone, you definitely want to do more check-in points. Let your employee speak. Maybe you're going to do more listening, and you're going to be listening for their tone. You're going to be listening for their words. You're going to have to really kind of focus on that. And you might want to have multiple conversations with them over the phone, more checkpoints after the fact to ensure that the relationship is intact, the message was communicated, because you don't get those visual cues, right, when they're on the phone. But absolutely, I know that, Marilyn, I've met you before and I see you on the screen now, and I feel like we can have a conversation about anything, right? So you have that established connection. So, yeah.
That's right. Building relationship and trust.
Mm-hmm.
A follow-up to that is, having a difficult conversation virtually is difficult. What happens when the employee is alone at home and we're not sure about their capacity to cope? Perhaps there's a history of a mental illness, or perhaps there's some signs or cues that a leader or manager has picked up on when they were working with this employee in the office. So they're a little hesitant about sharing this information virtually, and knowing that they're going to be at home alone to receive that. So what are some tips and how we can support the employee around that?
Yeah, so I think there's been a lot around mental health right now. And, to ensure that that is the number one priority for managers, for departments, for the public service, to ensure the safety and well-being of our employees. And so there is some departments that are using code 699 for employees who may not be able to engage in their work for various reasons, whether it is their ability to do their job or their other responsibilities, right? So I would say to managers, have a conversation within your departments on kind of how we're approaching that. If there's an employee who doesn't feel prepared for a conversation, they don't feel that in this global pandemic, performance management matters, and are resistant to that. So you can have those conversations because every department is approaching this differently. So I think you need to kind of, again, it's that individual approach, know your employees, and don't catch them off guard, right? Have a conversation with them, let them know what you want to discuss so that they can prepare, and offer them that option, if that's available to you, to not have that conversation, right? And maybe it's having more conversations on building their resiliency so that they can contribute, or what's going on for them from a work perspective that will help them do their best in this situation.
Okay, thank you. A question in French. Quel est le bon équilibre entre la préparation pour cette conversation afin d'avoir un plan de match et une écoute active qui permettait peut-être trouver des solutions qui n'avaient pas été envisagées? Sorry about my French, envisagées. Lisbeth, I know that you're also, before joining the NMC, you were also in performance management. So perhaps if you wanted to, you and Gina both wanted to tackle this question?
Sure. Alors, je vais essayer avec mon français aussi. Il y a plusieurs semaines que j'ai eu l'occasion de parler avec mes collègues francophones. Alors, c'est un peu plus difficile à la maison. Mais il faut que tu prépares pour comment la préparation va se dérouler. Ce n'est pas ce que tu vas dire, mais comment tu veux dire. Alors, peut-être, pense que c'est important, qu'est-ce que sont les solutions, mais pourquoi est-ce que ces actions sont arrivées avec leur travail. So, c'est vraiment de prendre une position, une perspective, de comprendre le pourquoi, pas le comment. Alors peut-être, Lisbeth, tu peux expliquer un peu,
oui.
Rajouter
oui.
un peu. Merci.
Oui, absolument. Alors, moi, je dirais que, c'est ça, en fait, moi, mon poste à tâche, c'est en gestion du rendement à l'Agence du revenu. Donc, moi, ce que je conseillais aux gestionnaires, c'était vraiment on doit se faire une idée basée sur les observations qu'on a faites de l'employé. Alors, ça, c'est un peu notre plan de match qu'on aurait. Mais là, quand on commence la conversation, je pense que si on prend une approche de coaching où on pose beaucoup de questions et puis on demande à l'employé, on peut lui dire, j'ai observé telle et telle chose. Est-ce que tu pourrais m'en parler un peu plus ou à quoi tu pensais quand telle et telle situation est arrivée ou comment est-ce que tu es arrivé à cette décision-là? Donc, c'est vraiment poser beaucoup de questions, mais je pense que c'est ça. Quand on se prépare pour la conversation, on va déjà avoir une idée de ce qu'on veut discuter, mais il faut rester ouvert à écouter ce que l'employé pourrait apporter comme nouvelle information qu'on n'aurait peut-être pas considérée.
Absolument. Parfait. Merci, Lisbeth.
Uh-oh. I can't unmute myself.
Oh, I think we can hear you, Marilyn.
Oh, you can. Okay, thank you. I have a bar through my muted microphone, so I wasn't sure whether I was on or off. Okay. Thank you for the tag team approach. I love that. That's awesome. We have time for just one last question, and here it is. How do you gather cues and feedback from your team through teleconference when you don't get any visual cues? And sometimes not a lot of verbal cues either. There's just some dead air, right? You're speaking and nothing's coming back. It's hard to get the feel of how the team is receiving your message.
Mm-hmm. So I think being in a region, I've managed a virtual team that was in Alberta, so I'm located in Winnipeg. And so I've had my fair share of experiences being on teleconferences. The one kind of benefit right now is that everybody's on teleconference. So at least we don't have a boardroom full of people with just one or two people dialing in and there being a lot of conversations happening at the table. Right now, everyone is on the phone. So again, it's good how to run a good meeting. So I would say that you set up the structure so that everyone on the meeting knows that you're actually going to come to them for their thoughts. Okay, so when you kind of share an idea, a new process, whatever that is on that teleconference, you're going to check in with all of your team members. So you're not going to make them fight for airtime. You're not going to have them trying to interrupt, because that's very uncomfortable. And for those who may have a tendency to introversion, they will be happy never to do that or not to bother. And then the extroverts might be taking up all the airtime. So definitely, if you're chairing that meeting, just ensure that they know that they're going to come to you for your thoughts so that people can prepare and be ready. So if I'm chairing that meeting, I'm going to call on, Lisbeth, what do you think of that? Do you have any questions? Can you just summarize kind of what you've understood from what I've shared so that I know that I explained it in the way that I wanted to, right? Because I don't have those visual cues of nodding to ensure understanding. And so again, just be open, be vulnerable, like that, they might say, I have no clue what you just said. You're making no sense, and you'll have to go back to the drawing board. But I think definitely just incorporating that into your teleconferences where, you're going to go around the table and check in with your staff. They know it's coming. It's a good way for you to get a sense of what people have understood. That would be my tip for that.
Wonderful. Lisbeth, did you want to add to that? Or
no, I think it's okay. Do we have any other questions?
Well, we're at the end of our session, unfortunately.
Okay.
So I'm going to just pass the baton over to you, Lisbeth, to conclude our session and have closing remarks.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Gina, to have taken the time to answer all the questions and all the questions that we got from the participants. Donc, certainement, l'information et les outils que vous avez partagés aujourd'hui vont aider les gestionnaires. I'd also like to thank all of the fabulous NMC team members that have helped today to coordinate this event, and of course, Marilyn for moderating this event. This was absolutely full of great tips and tricks and information that I think will go a long way in helping managers have these conversations.
For sure. And to all of the managers out there, right, we are all part of the same community. I love connecting and networking because I feel it's the best way to really move things forward in the public service. And so feel free to reach out to me either on Twitter or by email if you want to discuss some of the things we talked about today, or if you have any other questions that weren't answered. I'm happy to have met you, even if it's virtually, and build the relationship from here.
Wonderful. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you, Gina and Elizabeth. Thank you to our viewers. We look forward to hosting our next talk next week on Indigenous wisdom, leading virtually, given an Indigenous perspective. We are again Thursday at 1 p.m. and you will receive your MS team link via email. So feel free to register via our Twitter handle at NMC_CNG. And with that, have a wonderful afternoon. Bon après-midi. Au revoir.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.